සුළු ජාතීන්ට සිදු කරන වෙනස්කම්.
अवैध हत्या,
तजाद,
सामूहिक उड़ीवाकर,
बेअदालती,
जलवायु परिवर्तन,
भुखमरी,
लिंगना आधार पर भेदभाव,
වෛරී ප්‍රකාශන.
आर्थिक असमानता,
शिनाय,
पार्श्वीकरण,
जंग,
सुरक्षित स्थानों की कमी,
भ्रष्टाचार,
जातीना आधार पर भेदभाव,
සම්පත් අසමානව බෙදී යාම.
अशिक्षा,
तशद्दुद,
नीतियुडे अभावम,
तबईज,
धार्मिक कट्टरता, उत्पीड़न,
ඉඩම් ආරවුල්.
तकरार,
Yes, hello. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today in this iTAGe event, talking across generations on the state of preventing violent extremism in South Asia. The United Nations Alliance of Civilizations is very excited to organize its first iTAGe event in partnership with the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Sustainable Development and the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office. The event is organized within the framework of the second phase of Youth Waging Peace, which is an initiative of UNESCO, MGIEP, and UNAOC that takes the UNESCO MGIEP's youth-led guide on preventing violent extremism to the grassroots communities of South Asia. UNAOC and UNESCO MGIEP trained and empowered 35 South Asian youth leaders with the skills and tools to ideate and implement community-wide PVE through education activities and mobilize their communities towards sustainable peace. 12 brave Youth Waging Peace participants took it a step further and decided to develop a youth-led report on the state of preventing violent extremism in South Asia, which will include actionable recommendations on ways to influence policy and practices on PVE in the region. Concretely, it will give policymakers an accessible, youth-centered overview of violent extremism in South Asia, its definitions, how it manifests, what drives it, what regional stakeholders, especially the youth, are doing about it, and finally, areas for policy intervention to help build resilient and pro-social cultures that organically prevent violent extremism. The report, expected to be published in late 2021, will be widely shared as a PVE resource among key stakeholders. In order to collect the regional youth voices, the young authors of the report decided to collect recommendations, practices, and case studies via 3 data collection tools: a survey, focus group discussions, and finally, today's intergenerational dialogue. They managed to collect more than 1,000 survey responses and organize 3 in-depth focus group discussions with 43 young survey takers. 6 of those 43 are today's protagonists, and were selected as youth panelists for this very promising conversation with 4 senior PV experts. One of the young people will also moderate one of the sessions today. We have divided today's event into 2 sessions, which we hope you will enjoy it to the fullest. But before we start the first dialogue, the 3 organizing UN entities would like to give you a warm welcome. Without no further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first partner, UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, or MGIEP. Its director, Dr. Ananta Durayapa, was not able to join us today, but Mr. Abel Kane, Senior Project Officer, will speak for MGIEP. Abel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bram. Greetings, everybody, from New Delhi in India, where the monsoon rains have just started again for today. So it's nice and beautifully cool. Thank you to Bram for this wonderful introduction. I'm just going to, on behalf of our director, Professor Ananta Duraipa, I'd like to please read out his comments. It starts with acknowledging that the youth are fundamentally key to any discussion on the prevention of violent extremism. They can be vulnerable if they're not trained in social and emotional learning. And we know this because of the research from neurosciences say that individuals at the age of 16 to 24 are risk takers, they're impatient, and they're rebellious when they witness injustice. They want change, and this can either be harnessed for good or for violence. They want to be heard, and we must listen to them and not just hear them. We must refrain from youth washing. Our hope is that this iTAGE, or an independent talking across generations, among the many talks across generations that MGIEP has organized, will not only produce a wonderful report, but it'll catalyze youth to use this report to become agents for change, champions leading up to an International Day of Kindness that MGIEP is organizing. The Global Terrorism Index of 2020 showed that South Asia had the highest average impact from terrorism in 2019. Additionally, in that same year, Pakistan and the Philippines were in the top 10 countries most impacted by terrorism. And Bangladesh saw some terrible terrorist activity in 2019 with 6 attacks claimed by ISIS. The US Center for Disease Control and Prevention confirms that youth who have been exposed to violence are at a much higher risk of depression and deficiencies in empathy. These impairments can increase vulnerability for perpetuating violence and recruitment into extremist groups and organized violence. The trauma that this has on the health and the well-being of youth can last a lifetime, and maybe even several lifetimes. Exposure to this violence can alter biological development, impair brain architecture, and even influence DNA. These conditions generate a self-perpetuating cycle of violence, but there are interventions that can interrupt and reverse these outcomes. While traumatic stress is not an automatic trigger for the involvement with violence and violent extremism, it does not appear in most instances of radicalization. It's a key contributor, but not the pathway to violence. Extensive interviews with 44 members of violent white supremacist groups by the University of Maryland reveal the following. 45% reported being the victim of childhood physical abuse. 21% reported being the victim of childhood sexual abuse. 57% reported experiencing mental problems as diagnosed by a medical practitioner, either preceding or during their extremist involvement, and 72% reported problems with alcohol and illegal drugs. Today's iTAGE is the midway point of the survey tools and the focused group discussions that Bram was referencing. We're going to have a wonderful discussion between highly selected youth and senior speakers in order to have a frank dialogue. It's a no holds barred, no hierarchy dialogue. This is not youth washing, but a dialogue where the youth and the seniors have mutual respect for each other. They listen, they empathize, and they act with acts of kindness. We look forward to the report from our youth authors who are here today listening to this dialogue. We look forward to the report that will be coming out later this year. And just to conclude, I'd like to again sincerely thank UNAOC, our partners Bram, Julie, Carlos, UNESCO New Delhi office, particularly Maya, and of course, our speakers, our senior speakers, esteemed, well-renowned. We are looking forward to your wisdom, to your reality, to tell the youth. To our youth speakers, you were selected through an entirely rigorous process. You are now going to be part of a proud fellowship of Tagee speakers. We want you to be confident, honest, respectful, and to make sure that you get your thoughts, views, opinions, facts, statistics, data, solutions across to these senior speakers so that they can implement it. And one day you're going to be in that position, and MGIEP looks forward to be working with you throughout this entire process. Thank you very much to everybody. Really looking forward to this dialogue.
Thank you, Abel, for those very inspiring words. As the next speaker, I would like to present Mr. Eric Falt, who is the director and representative of the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us in person, but we have a video message. There seems to be an issue with the video, but we can come back later. So I will first give the floor to my programming coordinator of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, Mr. Alessandro Chirola. Alessandro, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bram. Good morning. Good morning, everybody from New York. Dear panelists, dear audience, first of all, I would like to thank you, all the speakers here with us today, and the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Development, and the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office as partner, together with the United Nations Alliance of Civilization in this initiative. South Asia is one of the most ethnically and religiously diverse regions in the world. In recent times, he has seen a worrying rise in religious and ethnic intolerance, with young people being pushed or pulled to the front lines of violent extremism. Unfortunately, youth are often depicted as victim or perpetrator and rarely as actor tackling violent extremism. However, regional and international efforts to prevent violent extremism and build peace can bear sustainable results until and unless young people are considered essential agents in our society. The current generation is acknowledged as the largest in history and has a critical role in shaping major social and political advancement, as well as being able to address the challenges related to global and local instability. Young people are the most able to mobilize their peers. Sadly, this interconnectivity has also been exploited by violent extremists, and is therefore necessary that we reclaim this space by amplifying the voices of young peace builders. Over the years and through its programming activities, UNAOC has encouraged youth leadership with the aim to help future generations become active global citizens, resilient to violent extremism, and able to counter radicalization through critical thinking and enhance social-emotional competencies. I'm very pleased to see that a group of South Asian youth took the lead in collecting the voices of their peers and in drafting an important report that will showcase the sentiment of young people of the region, what they want, what they feel, do, and think. I would like to congratulate them for their efforts in this wonderful initiative. It is impressive that they were able to collect until now more than 1,000 surveys from young peace builders across the region, with 6 of them joining us today as panelists. More than 1,000 young voices with unique ideas and approaches on what is violent extremism, its drivers, its manifestation, and its solution. Being just the tip of the iceberg, the 1,000 voices are a symbolic milestone and a sign of how many young people out there could be potential contributors to PVE policies and plans of the countries of the region. And I would like to call on policymakers in the region and beyond to take a closer look at this report once ready later this year. Without taking into account the insights of youth on PVE, PVE policy might fall short. In this context, there is a youth-led report on the state of PVE in South Asia that contains a collection of youth-centered actionable recommendations for policymakers, aims to provide a solution to this gap. It is also important to note that this report will not only be unique from its youth perspective, but also from a regional perspective, since it takes into consideration that PVE can only work if contextualized in light of the fact that drivers of violent extremism can vary across individuals, community, and region. Besides the survey and the focus group discussions, today's event will also have a unique added value by tackling the urgent need for intergenerational dialogue. The advantage of bringing the experience, wisdom, and skills of different people from different generations is priceless. And for this, I would really like to thank the senior expert joining us today for their commitment and openness in engaging with these amazing young people. Let me conclude my remark, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion and to reading the report later in the year. Thank you very much. Then over to you, Bram.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you very much. I got the news that we can play the video of Mr. Eric Falt, so Director and Representative of UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office.
Honorable guests, esteemed speakers, colleagues, and members of the audience, good evening. UNESCO New Delhi is delighted to be taking part today in this intergenerational discussion on the prevention of violent extremism in South Asia. I wish, first of all, to send my best regards and appreciation to our partner organizations, the UN Alliance of Civilizations and UNESCO MGIEP, as well, of course, as the numerous young representatives who have helped put this event together. This follows great efforts made by young people all over South Asia during the past few months. Young peace builders, supported by the 3 UN partner agencies, have collected experiences and voices of over 1,000 young people in the region on the topic of violent extremism. And these efforts and the dialogue that will follow today are truly taking place at a very pertinent point in time. Around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing divides and inequalities and allowed different forms of discrimination, hate, and extremism to fester in our societies. Growing levels of polarization and hate speech risk undermining the trust and cohesion that hold our societies together and present all of us with an urgent challenge to address the root causes of these challenges. In this context, UNESCO celebrates the resilience and creativity of young people in South Asia who have, over the past year, shared their experiences related to violent extremism and who are making efforts to promote peaceful coexistence in their communities. Indeed, the course ahead must be charted together through the whole of society and with a participatory approach that reflects the needs and experiences of young people. Violent extremism is a fundamental social problem which calls for social solutions where everyone is a stakeholder. Achieving this requires mutual understanding and dialogue between generations. That's why intergenerational discussions like the one today are important. They are meant to bring together the experiences, wisdom, and skills of different people and generations. These dialogues are essential in making sure that strategies, policies, and plans in all countries of the region take into account the experiences and recommendations made by youth and benefit current and future generations alike. This is, again, I must stress, particularly relevant in the current context as countries consider policy options for a post-COVID world and the decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This context provides youth an opportunity to bring forth their innovative ideas and entrepreneurial spirit and to see how they can reimagine and re-engineer a world that is more peaceful and just and where no one is left behind. In South Asia, with the largest youth labor force in the world and with almost half of its population below the age of 24, young people truly hold the key to a more resilient and sustainable future. Therefore, I hope this dialogue between youth and their seniors today will serve as an insightful and open discussion about the issues at hand and provide an opportunity to join hands in the common pursuit of promoting social cohesion. Listening to and respecting one another can achieve the kind of collective intelligence that will help us to build more peaceful societies. Across generations, we all have to make sure that the future will turn out better for everyone. Thank you, and I wish you a stimulating and fruitful dialogue.
Thank you. Many inspiring words from the three organizing organizations, but now we will proceed to the part of our event for which you're all here, which are the intergenerational dialogues. I know you must all be very excited. The first session will be moderated by Ms. Maya Litinen. She's a PVE and hate speech analyst at UNESCO New Delhi, and Mr. Parviz Mosamim, who is the coordinator at Students for Liberty organizations. I hope you enjoy. Parviz, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bram, for the inputs and being very supportive during the PVE report. So a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is joining us through Zoom, and also the people who are watching us through social media, especially Facebook of UNAOC. I'm so delighted and I'm so excited to be one of the moderators of today's dialogue of iTAGe, talking across generations on the state of PVE in South Asia. So let me introduce myself a little and just we go ahead with the dialogue, because I know that everyone is waiting to have a fruitful discussion. So this is Parviz Mosamim. I'm a journalist, a local coordinator at the Students for Liberty organization, which we focus on peace, education, and liberty in South Asia. Also, I am one of the youth authors on the state of PVE in South Asia. So we all know that the topic that today we are going to discuss is not just significant in South Asia, but actually in the global context. So before that we start the dialogue, so I hand over the speech to my great friend, Maya. Maya, the floor is yours. Please have your introduction or your speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Parviz. Thank you, Bram. So my name is Maya Lutinen. I am from the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office working on topics related to prevention of violent extremism and hate speech, and will be co-moderating today with Parviz. A pleasure to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. Just in the beginning, I'd like to point that if any members of the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box, and we'll pick them up as we go. And over to you, Parviz, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Maya. So I'm so excited, because I'm seeing our 3 youth speakers here and also our 2 senior experts. So I hope that we have a great discussion. So as we see the South Asian countries nowadays, so one of the countries that the violent extremist cases is increasing is in Afghanistan, and we are happy that we have Mojda from Afghanistan. So let me introduce Mojda, and then I asked the first question from Mojda. So Mojda is a civil activist. She holds a Bachelor of Law and Political Science from Herat University in Afghanistan, and she has been engaged in civil activities and advocacy in Afghanistan, as well as now she's doing her master's degree in Turkey. But as we know, Mojda now is in Afghanistan. So Mojda, welcome to the program. We are very happy to have you. So the first question is from you. How does the current situation in Afghanistan impact young people, and what is the role of youth in the conflict? So if you got the question, so please have your time for 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll listen to you.
Okay. Thank you, and I'm very happy and excited that I'm a member of a panelist of this dialogue. As it is clear for everybody, the current situation of Afghanistan is very disaster. We have some civil war, ethnic wars, and also all the kind of violent extremism in high ranking in my country. And I know the most generation, especially the youth generation, is very affected by these situations. And most of our generations, they immigrated to the country because there is no safety for them, and there is no hope. They are all hopeless, but youth trying to fix these situations, and they always effort to change this situation, especially women. And another issues that one talks, it is about the gender discriminations in high rank. Because of these issues, the most sections of our society that is include the women, they are to prevent the kind of violent extremism. So I want that how we can, how especially our generation, especially the youth people, in this situation that the civil war is now in Afghanistan, how they can change the situations, and how the governors support the youth people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mujda, for the inputs. So we all know that the current situation in Afghanistan is not good. The conflict is going on in most of the cities in Afghanistan, and unfortunately, as Mujda said, most of the young generation in Afghanistan, they are hopeless. They are about to leave the country. They think that their future is not in this country. But we do hope that we see a peaceful Afghanistan in the future, and we have a peace deal with the people that they are fighting. So I hand over the speech to Maya.
Thank you, Parvis. And I would like to next introduce and ask the question from one of our senior experts. So we have with us Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, who has founded the Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace Organization, which promotes the leadership of women in South Asia in areas of peace and security. Thank you so much for being here. So Dr. Gopinath is a scholar working on the topics of peace and security. And therefore, I would like to ask you a conceptual question, Dr. Gopinath. Who should define what is violent extremism, and what are the impacts of defining violent extremism? Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. First of all, deep gratitude to MGIEP, UNESCO, and also the Alliance on Civilizations for this amazing opportunity to interact with young people such as you and to hear your wisdom on this. Now, this whole business of definitions has been very fraught. As you know, that there has been research on this, both as you said in Maryland, in the United Kingdom, and across the globe, but there has been no definitive definition of what constitutes terrorism. And there is a tendency to conflate violent extremism with terrorism, which is something we should be doing. It's a much more nuanced matrix. And you know that because you know about hate speech and you've been working against this whole process of dehumanizing so-called the other. So the question of definitions is a fraught one. All I would like to say is that we need to address, especially in South Asia, and confront and accept that in the land of the Buddha and Gandhi, there is a deep-seated ambivalence to violence. And this is not just limited to young people, it is across. And I think in some ways, our generation has failed the youth of South Asia. So it's important for us to move away from framing this whole business as though the youth are at risk or the youth are the problem. Basically, if we are going to have a counter narrative, then that narrative is going to come from the young people. Let's not forget that even while 1 out of 4 people, young people, are affected by conflict, the number, the percentage and the proportion of young people who ascribe to violent extremism is a small fraction of their total population. Now, this is sometimes missed out in the larger meta-narratives which define policy panic, where there is a tendency to look at the youth as some kind of a liability that needs to be somehow pulled out of this whole quagmire that is awaiting to catch hold of them. I think it's important for us to shift the frames of reference. And you know, there's that famous book by George Lakoff that said, "Don't think elephant." In other words, don't accept the frames of reference that are handed to you. Reinvent the vocabulary. And I think that is what we are looking for from this dialogue, which young people like you will redefine. For example, when after 9/11, when the Bush administration framed this whole thing as the axis of evil, okay, you already have created exclusions. So what are you doing? You know that Einstein has said that you cannot find a solution from the same consciousness that created the problem. So how is that shift in consciousness going to happen? That would be the question that I would ask young people, because they are supremely positioned to offer this alternative vocabulary. I'll stop there and maybe proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. And I think we can see that we have a big force of youth peace builders behind us working across the region on these topics for sure. And I agree with you about reinventing the vocabulary and seeing what these issues are in South Asia. I think that's the point of this discussion. I'm sure the young people have lots of questions that they would like to present related to these issues as well. And next, Parviz, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. And also thank you so much, Professor Kopinat, for your great information. So we have another youth speaker. So he's Mr. Hasibul Hassan from Bangladesh. Hasibul is one of our youth speakers who has worked on research projects with large organizations in Bangladesh, including Plan International and the South Asian Network on Economic Modeling. So Hasibul, the question that I want to ask you is that in the context of Bangladesh, how do you think volunteers play a role in preventing violent extremism? And what structural changes would amplify the efforts of these volunteer groups? Please have your time for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Parvez. And I think as a Bangladeshi, you know, all over the world know Bangladesh is a peaceful country and we are known all over the world as a peaceful nation. But in recent years, we face a huge concern of some increased terrorist activities and political violence and violent extremism, which is also a cause of concern for young generation who's born later 20th century. So I think you asked me about the volunteerism. Most of the young people are doing their activity through the use of proper technology, but there is a concern that misuse of technology and abuse of technology, some like spiritual leaders or some like terrorist group use this technology abusively. They're going to misleading some political narratives and they misguide our youth, especially most of the university kids or high college school going kids. And I think if we focus on volunteerism with our policymakers or our government also focus on the useful and fruitfulness of our technology and social media, because if you can't handle this kind of misuse or misguiding, you can't handle the volunteerism of youth don't give you the fruitful or fruition their activities. And if you talk about the volunteerism, I think we should make a inclusive situation. You know, in our country, most of the people are poor and their literacy rate is so little, though they don't know even about for example, if I go in my rural areas and told about them that you should do that to prevent the extreme violence, they should think what are you talking about, we know, don't they? Because you know our ancestors are peaceful, they don't even know about the existing of this kind of things. But in an international perspective, there is a huge concern about the recent activity in our Bangladesh, especially the terrorist activity. So I think we should make an inclusive and resilient policy to make youth and make a huge connectivity with higher officials and make them a platform to ensure that their volunteerism bring the current and the most fruitful message to the community and especially the marginalized community where we can focus. So that's all about, I think.
Thank you so much, Hasibul. We all know that for preventing violent extremism, we need a lot of stakeholders to engage and just to work. And so one part can be like volunteers, especially the young generation, that they know that, for example, violent extremism in South Asia is increasing and they should fight against that one. So I hope that the policymakers also take care of for example, the volunteer groups that they're working in their regions. And we have like productive kind of activities. So Maya, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Parviz. Next, I would like to introduce our second expert, our senior expert, Mr. Muraritharan from the Ministry of Education in Sri Lanka. He is currently directing the Department for Peace, Education and Reconciliation. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Given his extensive experience and background in the field of education, including on teacher education, I would like to ask you, sir, first, what should a peace curriculum in a classroom look like? And what are some of the best practices and challenges in building peace through the education sector? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. In this Sri Lanka, the curriculum was totally focused on academic subjects, but we have experienced movements in 72 movement in southern part of Sri Lanka. Then after the ethnic riots in 77 and 83, radical movement in the northern province. So these experiences made policymakers to introduce social integration and value education into the school culture or school curriculum. So in 92, in 90, the extensive research was conducted about the youth unrest. From that respect, 97 education reforms considered about this peace education and social integration concepts, and they try to introduce as a cross-cutting method, no special subject introduced, but religious subject first focused for this peaceful living. But it won't work well. It didn't work well. But in 2008, we formulated a policy how to address this issue and how the peace education could be introduced. So again, it has to be a cross-cutting solution. So we introduced through extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, and selected subjects and languages. You know, Sri Lanka as Tamil speaking and Sinhala speaking population. So that first we thought that each other should know about the language. In the northern part and eastern part, people speak Tamil, and other 7 provinces predominantly Sinhala speaking population. So in order to get a mutual understanding, the language is vital. So we thought of starting English as a compulsory subject or English medium education, but finding difficult to get qualified teacher. That's still in a slow process. In other words, we thought of teaching Tamil to Sinhala students and teaching Sinhala to Tamil students and teaching vice versa. So that also we made it compulsory for grade 6 to 7. That also ongoing process. And civic education, we found a suitable subject to introduce these kind of concepts. So through curriculums, extracurriculum, co-curricular activities and school, we try to make schools bilingual schools that provide Sinhala medium education as well as Tamil medium education. But we can't establish such schools in most of the areas because those areas are restricted with single language speaking population. So we have out of 10,000 schools, we have to able to establish 434 bilingual schools. So there are barriers. Some are, but the policy we formulated in 2008. This also during the time of the war, you know, ethnic war experienced by Sri Lanka for over 30 years from 83 to 2009. So after 2009, the war is over. So we thought of in line, we have to, that policy has to be revised. So now that process is ongoing. But again, in 2019, we experienced a different problem. That is, we all heard about Easter attack. 3 churches in Sri Lanka was subjected to attack by Muslim youth. So these things, time to time, that the pattern of the conflict is changing. So according to that, we need to change the curriculum. Anyhow, Sri Lanka is also experiencing that PVE. So again, that peace education is important for us. But however, that the school education is more focused on exam-oriented task. So then this kind of co-curricular or the peace education activities we introduced in the school system was not recognized properly, and the motivation toward to implement that activities are very low.
Thank you so much, sir. It's really interesting to hear about your experiences over these years and starting this kind of exciting programs on peace education. And thank you for your honesty and, frank assessment of how things have been. And it seems like there is some great progress that has been made on introducing different kinds of schools with different kinds of languages, but the work ahead is one that we can all contribute to, hopefully, through our youth here as well. I'm sure they have some questions as well related to what you said. Thank you. And Parviz?
Thank you so much, Maya. So before that, I asked the next question. So of course, the questions are also welcome. So our audience, you can feel free to write your questions in QA box, and we will pick your questions and we'll ask from our senior experts as well as our youth speakers, as well as if our youth speakers they have questions from our senior experts, feel free to write and we'll ask, and also if our senior experts they have questions from the youth speakers also. We have our third youth speaker, Sadia Khalid. So Sadia Khalid has a PhD in education and is involved in research and activism related to climate change. So given her experience in running 2 initiatives for youth empowerment and climate change. Sadia, welcome. And the question that I want to ask is, how do you think that violent extremism and education relate to each other in the context of preventing violent extremism? How does climate change impact drivers of violent extremism? Please have your time for 3 minutes. Please unmute yourself. Sadia, you're muted. Still, we cannot hear you. Yeah.
My mic was mute. Okay, good evening, everyone. And my point of view regarding this question is that what point of view we have regarding the violent extremism and the conflict in our society and how it relates to the climate change and because right now we are also in a climate emergency and we are also in a peace emergency too. Because we are in the denial mode. All our stakeholders, all the institutions, whether they are at the government or the private level or civil society or the youth leaders, they are basically in the denial mode, and they thought we have a lot of time, and we are not in the peace or climate related emergency, and we have a lot of time to solve it, and that's why they are not serious about it. And regarding the government, and as far as I have studied or I know that most of the countries even do not have the laws and the policies regarding these 2 issues, and that is why all the violent extremism is coming from the people or from the public, because they know that if they are committing any kind of a violent act, or they are harming the environment, or their activities are negatively harming the environment, the law will do nothing, and they they will ask freely and they can roam freely, and no one will be going to do. So first of all, for me, it is very, very important to highlight these issues. And first of all, we have to come out from the denial mode, and we have to do something very, very seriously. And then all the government and private institutions, civil institutions, civil leaders, and the civil society all need to come on one platform, that now we are serious for these issues. And the third thing is that being an educationist, and we all know that education is the powerful and the greatest tool for tackling any issue, or for tackling any problem. So now we need peace curriculum. We need climate education curriculum in our schools, colleges, and university. And for designing and preparing the curriculum, we need two things. We need the content on the theoretical level, and then the practical level. As the previous question was about the peace curriculum. So as far as I know, and I'm doing things for developing the content or the curriculum. So it is very important that we have to add the theoretical point of view, and in the theoretical curriculum, we need to address the theories, we need to address the reasons, we need to address the laws, and we need to address that why it matters and why our society need it at an immediate level. And then the next point is at the practical level, because if we do not practice it on the practical level, then the theories all goes vain, as it is going from last many years. Even our education system is all of us telling that we need to take care of our environment. We are responsible, and we are the first and last generation to deal with these issues. And if we do not take care of our environment or our peaceful society, so we will be going nowhere. But still, we are not serious. So on practical ground, we need to educate our younger generation about it, because younger generation is passionate, they are serious, and they can do many things that we could not think right now. So this is my point of view about this question.
Thank you so much, Sadia, for wonderful input. So I do agree that we should educate young generation regarding the climate change, education, and also it's a need, not just in South Asia, in the global context. So Maya, do you think that we should pick some questions from maybe you, the speakers, to senior experts, or vice versa, or not just we go to the questions from our audience? What do you think?
I think we could first allow some of our youth speakers to present some questions to the seniors based on the answers that they have given so far and the points that they've raised. So perhaps Hasibul, would you have some questions, please?
Yeah, sure, definitely. And as there are government officials and senior experts on PVE, I want to ask, is whole of government approach enough to fight against PVE, or we should focus on some alternative approaches, like engage non-state actors in this activity to make it more inclusive? So that's my question.
Answer that?
Sadia, can you mute your voice, please?
May I answer that question, Hasibul?
Yes, of course, Professor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hasibul. You raised a very important issue. And I think it was Maria Montessori who had said that, managing conflict is the work of government, but establishing a lasting peace is really the work of education. And there is this tendency somehow to demonize what you call non-state actors who stay outside the pale of the law and order framework of governments. Let's not forget that very often when we spoke about framing, how do we frame this whole issue? What do we call terrorism? It's a really wide open and very complex area. So we cannot use very glib definitions. But we do know, Hasibul, that of late, there has been a lot of Islamophobia associated with the way in which this issue is being framed, which is very unfortunate. For us in South Asia, especially, because we are a multicultural, plural society, we need to establish, understand our differences, and build on our commonalities in our search for common ground. And so when we talk about bringing misguided youth into the mainstream, we have to be very clear about what is this so-called mainstream we are talking about. It's a muddy mainstream, and let's not forget that acts of terrorism are not just confined to non-state actors. States are capable of extreme forms of violence. We know the crushing of dissent in our part of the world. We know the attack on Dalits. We know the sort of public lynchings that happen. And in many of this, the state is complicit. We have to recognize it, and we have to call out the violence of state structures as well. Again, and with due apologies to anyone here who might feel otherwise, somehow there is also this perpetuation of a discourse which sees violent extremism, terrorism, somehow existing in the global south, right? And that the global north is really this benign overseer of democratic values. We know this is not true. We know about what passes as humanitarian intervention in many parts of the world is sometimes a humanitarian disaster. And I think it's important for us to be aware of the facts, even as we speak of values and of peace and so on. The other, and I please correct me, stop me if I'm going on for too long. The conventional notion of peace as the lady in white, wholly passive and passively holy, is now being debunked, because we don't want the peace of the great, we want peace with justice. So it's important to recognize that peace is what happens, as Johan Galtung said, when creative conflict transformation happens non-violently. Conflict is a part of life. Not all conflict is bad. Because if we didn't have conflict, say, between your generation calling us out and asking us to explain why we were complicit in these patterns of violence and reinforcing them through states, through our education system. And education has not always been benign. We know from experiences in Rwanda, Sri Lanka, which denied the Tamils access to their mother tongue. We know of so many cases, and yet we also know of other instances like the Education for Mutual Understanding in Ireland that brought together so-called warring communities together. We know about Neve Shalom in Jaffa, where Palestinian and Jewish students come together to discuss their differences. So we have to recognize our differences. We have to celebrate our differences while we search for common ground. So I think your question is a very, very pertinent one, and thank you for raising it. One other thing, that when we are talking about education for peace and sustainable development, while we need to comfort the afflicted, we also need a vocabulary that afflicts the comfortable, especially when they're comfortably wrong. And I think that it's not just building curricula on peace as if everything is wonderful. We patch up our differences. Kumar Rupasinghe of Sri Lanka has written beautifully on what is active coexistence. It's not just the coexistence of, recognizing our boundaries and borders, keeping outside, away from each other, and somehow talking about coexistence. It's how we co-mingle, how we co-create a better world, and how it is an inclusive world, even as it doesn't like to homogenize. This is the real challenge of peace building. Thank you so much for that question. And you've given us more answers than we have for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kopinat, for your great, it was like a lecture. I really enjoyed that one. Also, Hasibul, thank you so much for your great question. I think we will have a lot of questions from the audience and also from the UD speaker. So I give the floor to another UD speaker. If he or she has any question, Sadia or Mujda, if you have any question from our senior experts.
May I ask?
Sure, sure.
I have a question about one of the most issues that all Afghan women from this view, and is this about their culture that have very unity, and this is the cause of the gender discriminations and also the low level of participation of women in different affairs such as political, economical, and etc. Although the current system of Afghanistan and law prohibit any kind of discriminations and give women more chance to participate, but still the participations of women is fragile. In your opinion, how and which phase this culture will be eradicated, and how people's attitudes towards women during this situation that we are involved in a war, how we can change it immediately? Thank you.
Thank you, Mujtaba. However, I think we didn't hear you very well. So I think this question can fit with the background of Professor Gopinath. If you want to answer this one about gender discrimination, gender education.
It's a very difficult question, but thank you very much for it, Mujtaba. You know, in Afghanistan, you have what is known as a National Action Plan, and which is actually to give teeth to the Resolution 1325 of the UN on women, peace, and security. You also have, on paper, a 27% representation of women. So what does it say? That it's not what is legal that is good, but justice and legality, there is a gap. Because, for example, the absence of women at the talks, right, at the jirgas, what has happened? Why is it that Afghan women who've shown so much resilience, I mean, we know about RAWA and other organizations, why is it that women who have shown so much resilience have been kept out of the peace talks? Why is it that they have to struggle every moment? Because patriarchy exists in many, many ways and has many faces, which is why this new resolution, 2535 on youth, peace and security, YPS, suggests that the YPS agenda must work hand in hand with the WPS agenda. Because what are the two things that we need to counter in our societies? Patriarchy and gerontocracy, where the elders sit on judgment, people like me, and don't give the youth spaces for articulation. Look at the spaces of dissent that are closing. Look at democratic articulations that are being snuffed out by populist governments. They are using instruments of the state, draconian laws, to snuffle dissent. If you don't have spaces to articulate dissent, you are going to have violence of some kind or the other, because voices need to be heard, and youth such as you need to give voice to the voiceless. And therefore, the women's peace and security agenda and the youth peace and security agenda are wedded together. They are intertwined. They have to work together. And in Afghanistan, the women are remarkable. You know, even in the last 10 years, look at the kind of enterprises they've opened. Look at the kind of creative mechanisms they've used to fight patriarchy. In spite of that, they have everyday resistances and daily mutinies in small places, in their homes, in their communities, in their schools, and so on. And you know that huge, big outrage that happened when the teacher of Islamiyat was murdered in the public square. There was such a, on Farkhunda, there was a huge, swelling up of public sentiment. So I think people like you have the courage. Women like you have the courage. The youth, peace and security agenda is also for young women. And therefore you have to marry the two. And really hats off to the women of Afghanistan. And I know that in the hands of people like you, your future is safe. It's difficult. It's very difficult, because now what you're going to experience is going to be a trying time for you to find these creative spaces. How do you do that is another discussion altogether, but they do exist. Thank you very much for that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Coconut. So since I'm from Afghanistan and I did my master's degree, my thesis actually on the representation of women in the government agencies. So from 2001 till now, however, women in Afghanistan, they faced a lot of challenges, but we had progress as well. So we have their representation now in the government. There were women that they advocated for their rights and they stood for their rights. I think that as I can add something for Mujda is this, that you as Afghan woman, you should stand for your rights. That the word here for your voices, that you are fighting for your rights as well. So I don't want to speak too much in this case because we have a lot of questions. I hand over to Maya because she collected some questions from the audience. Maya.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone in the audience for being so active. We have one question for Mr. Muralitharan. Thank you, Oshan Gunalitha Lake. He's asking, how can young people support building solid peace education frameworks to address the ideas of social cohesion, conflict resolution, PVE? So he's talking a little bit about how there's been a lot of interesting progressive initiatives. Some of them, unfortunately, have not quite taken root. And what's the role that youth can take in this? Thank you.
If I got that question, that how young people can support for this social cohesion, the PVE, this concept is for young people. The young people, those who are in schools, now they have to thoroughly understand how their future world should be, how it could be molded according to their need. So such education should be provided. Therefore, radical education reform is needed nowadays to cater for these issues. So the young people, a country like Sri Lanka and India, mostly the education produce a competitive situation, and the rote learning given priority in the school system. So they are very rigid to learn about other issues, other cultural, other religious background, and how can mingle with them and all. In Sri Lankan situation, most of the things, these ethnic groups are compartmentalized. Very, very few occasions allow them to meet together because of the geographical reason, and schools also separated according to the ethnic. So, Sinhala schools, Tamil schools, Muslim schools. So the senior citizens of the country also like to make that divisions. And to continue with same kind of schooling and continue with same kind of exam oriented education system. In order to enter the world of work, they think about the knowledge, not think about the skills. So the young people, they should think about the future and think about how the parents, the forefathers behave, what they did the mistakes, and how that impact on the younger citizens' future. So they have to think properly. In Sri Lanka, we had some sort of such thinking, but unfortunately, that was distorted by some extremist group in 2019. That bypassing all seniors' thoughts, the younger crowd tried to get together through the Facebook and other social media. The tendency was there in 2018 to 2017, but unfortunately, that trend was broken by some these extremist activities. So time to time, we have to monitor the youth, how their thinking pattern is in line with the contemporary world and their future of the world. So young people are the most vital in this regard to understand themselves in order to make better world tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring. And I think that's true about the youth-led learning and how, youth can promote the 21st century skills and the type of skills and cognitive skills that they think that the future needs. I think that's a good point that you made. I think we would.
Okay.
Yes, Parvis.
I'm sorry. I think Professor Gopinath may have questions from the youth speakers. If it is like this, it will be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, this is a question to all, Sadia, Moshe, and Hasibul. We've always been relying on what we call the hardware of peace building, in other words, curriculum, what is taught in the school, how do you get the skills, the tools. And where you people are so richly endowed is about the software of peace building, the emotional, the connect, we are all interconnected. This whole idea of interconnectedness about what is called emotional learning. So what, according to you, would be some of the important predispositions that you feel should be foregrounded and highlighted? For example, I would say empathy. I would say stepping into the shoes of the other, thinking from both sides of your brain, not just the logical, but also what is known as emotional. What would you think is for example, what you would call global intelligence? What does global intelligence require us to learn from you? Because you're all, so connected globally. Globalization has done that. You're in the virtual world a great deal. You're influenced both by the negative aspects of it, but also the positive connections that you make. So what do you think are some of the predispositions that outside of so-called formal curricula or government policy that you would like to bring to this space of youth building peace? I'm taking notes so that I can learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah.
I think we don't have too much time. Sadia, just go ahead, please speak very briefly.
Okay, ma'am has raised a very, very important concern or a question, and I guess we all must think about it. And as I have mentioned earlier, that early years of education are very, very important for transforming the behaviors and attitude of a child. So I guess we should come with a model of modeling and actions. Matlab, if the elders' actions are positive, and if the elders' actions are teaching them a good ethics and the good morality, because peace and the violent extremism can be stopped with the good modeling or the good parenting, a good modeling of the elders, and if the elders are doing the things. So in the early ages, we must give them the good example that how important caring is. One word we always used to teach in a poem, or that caring is sharing. Yeah, sharing is caring. So it is an important thing. If you share things, if you do not need one thing, and if you share with someone, it can bring the smile on someone. If you are kind to animals, you are kind to the people who are weak or who do not have one thing, so it will bring the smile on them. So I guess the lessons of kindness, empathy, a good deed, and how you take care of the elders, how you take care of the society, how you take care of the things around you. So it can really help. And now one more important thing, that what our parents are, what do they always like teach us the rigidity and the hatred towards the other community. And I guess if we start celebrating the different festivals of the different religion, of the different races, of the different people belonging from different ethnic groups. So it can bring together. If we are celebrating picnic in a public ground and all the people are with us, it could eliminate the hatred. It could eliminate the misconception between us that maybe these are different, maybe they hate us. No one hate us. If we just spread the messages of the humanity, love and care, so it will really change the society. I know it is difficult, but we can start from ourselves. If I can start with my kids, my siblings, or nephew and nieces. We should start from ourselves. So these are the things which I have changed in my life, and I changed my lifestyle in looking towards other people who are not like us in dresses, in language, in religion, but I just seeing them with the eye of love, care, and kindness.
Thank you so much, Sadia. Thank you so much. So Hasibul, if you just answer very briefly, 1 minute kind of, it will be great.
Yeah, we as ma'am says, we are connected across the global world because we are living in a technology era, and it is so easy to get a message from others and share our thoughts, share our culture, share our diverse thoughtful activity with others, with other ethnic people. So I think there's a very strong way we should make connectivity to reach the marginalized people and reach the ethnic people, to give the message to how should care each other, or how should show some affection, how should show some love to the poor. For example, I want to say my organization during the pandemic hardships, we organized some charitable activities, and we also provide study materials to children to learning them. You know, most of the time during the pandemic, schools are closed, so their educations are being hampered. So in this way, we youth, the stronger generations, the stronger, more, I think, than the others. So we can make sure the change. We can support each other. We can support our beloved ones, as well as our marginalized community who are not connected with the modern world, with modern thoughts. So we can share our thoughts with them in an indigenous way by going to them, by reach them, as well as we also share our affection, thought, compassion in virtual technology or social media, as you say. But we should also focus on the negativity, as you say, ma'am. There is some negativity points, some spiritual leaders on terrorism activity misguide our youth, and they can also profit in use technology easily. So I think government officials and state actors should also focus on technology and virtual world to stop this kind of misguiding activity.
Thank you so much, Hasibul. Thank you so much. So Maya, do you have any question from the audience? And after that, we will have the last question, maybe. I think because we have 10 minutes left.
Thank you very much. I will just first allow Mr. Muralidharan to ask any questions, one question perhaps from the youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The youth, how do you feel the present schooling system in your country? Whether do the teachers really properly guiding the kids to address the contemporary social issues in the society? What do you think about that during your school experience and the out of school? Now we are looking into your own school system. Then how the teacher's role play in this regard?
Mujta, you can answer this question.
Okay. First of all, our education systems, Afghanistan education system, have many problems. Ignoring that we don't have enough schools or we don't have enough teachers to teach our subjects, But behind of these issues, we have some problems for the subjects that include in the books. Most of the books, especially the social books, they show the women as a second sex in the books. And always we can see some gender discriminations with these books. But fortunately, nowadays, some books has changed, and government have more attention to these problems faced with them. We have some teachers that during my faculty educations that we studying my bachelor degrees. One of my teachers, he never give a chance to a woman give a present in the class. Just the man present their project, and the women never allow. And this is very a shame for teachers. So we have this kind of problems that hopefully, and I hope the government should focus on these problems, and also the international organ. I hope.
Thank you so much, Mojda. Thank you. Maya, do you have any question from the audience, or you would like to combine the questions in one question, as you say? So go ahead.
Thank you very much.
We don't have okay.
We have a lot of interesting questions about definitions of PV, about the new vocabulary needed, and some of the root causes of violence. I think lots of interesting questions that some of the discussions has already highlighted. But I think a lot of the questions also refer to the future of working with a new framework towards PVE and the changes that we would like to see. So I would like to just allow perhaps a few of you to end with this. We have 5 minutes, so with the question of, if you could change one thing in South Asia for a peaceful world, what would it be? Perhaps we can start with, who would like to start? Dr. Gopinath?
There are so many things that one needs to change in South Asia. But first of all, for all of us, we have to be the change that we wish to see in the world, to use that old quote, and to be able to really understand the complexities of our situation, to be able to celebrate diversity, to eschew homogenization, to walk away from the notion that young people are somehow a problem. We have to, from the so-called demographic dividend, they are a peace dividend. And that's what we have to see them as a valuable asset that has the potential to change, transcending borders and boundaries. They are free of the cartographic anxieties that governments have in the South Asian region. And so transcend those borders and boundaries, both of the mind, look at inner disarmament so that the outer disarmament will follow. And say no to violence, no to guns, and so on. But it's a difficult thing to do. We have to somehow, all I wanted to say is that the woods were made for the hunter of dreams, the rivers for the fisher of song. For those who hunt for the gunless game, the trees and the woods and the streams belong. So let's reclaim our ecological beauty through engaging with peace and look at it as one holistic approach, which includes some of the sustainable development goals, which are only scratching the surface. There are many other things. It's a work in progress. So sustainability, peace, eschewing violence, and let's reclaim that heritage and work together for co-create a world that works for all, not just for some sections. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautifully put. Thank you very much. Hasibul, would you like to give some thoughts on this? And perhaps if you had any thoughts on the question that Mr. Muralitharan posed earlier as well. Thank you.
As ma'am says, we should reach the more people and marginalized communities and everyone. Like we all know, there nobody left behind us. So I think we should use some indigenous technique to make our nations, make our region more peaceful and more sustainable, more resilient, more inclusive. But I would like also say about the Mr. Muralitharan activities that he's from education sector. Most of the education policy and education activity in our region are on indoor activity. So we should also arrange some outdoor activity for our students, for our children. And in those outdoor activities, they grow their responsibility. They know about their more practical life. They grow their compassion, affection, each other. So I think we also express the outdoor activity with our teachers, with our parents, and with our little children and students. So education sector also should focus on some outdoor activities on our schools, college, and universities to grow our nation, grow our more peace, grow our regions as a more peaceful and more resilient.
Thank you so much, Hasibul. That's a great point. Sadia, over to you for 1 minute.
Yes, in order to end the religious, social, and all type of extremism, we need to increase the advocacy for the peace, harmony, and promoting the cultural diversity. As we are living in an Asian country, and we are very, very much close to our culture and to our rich culture. So we need peace advocacy at all levels. In our schools, in other institutions, in our public places, and all the places, we need to promote the messages of peace, harmony, and cultural diversity. And for this, we can organize the cultural activities, cultural sports, and arts related activities. We can also paint our public walls with the messages of peace, harmony, and cultural diversity. And we can and we need also to reclaim the public spaces, because in the past centuries, we can see when the public places are actively used for the sports activities and for gathering of all the people at one place, and they are the festivals celebrated all together. At that time, there is more peace and harmony, and the people are more connected with each other. They are more human, and they are less violent and extremist. So we need to revive the public spaces, our public walls, and we can give the messages of the peace, harmony at each and every place. And I guess we need to play our role as a youth organization. We need to increase the peace advocacy in the written form or in the festivals or anything we can do.
Thank you so much, Satya. Maya, I think that we can ask one more question from our senior experts, right?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so
we have Sihad Sani, who has asked a question in the audio.
you can ask.
So I think,
yeah, go ahead and ask that question.
Yeah, thank you. So this is kind of future studies and research. How can we do more research and work understanding violent extremism as a social construct? Should we understand this through neuroscience? And what are the different kind of research that we need to make sure that we understand this before it goes into textbooks and education systems? So that's a question perhaps to Dr. Gopinath, but also to Mr. Muralitharan about the research that we need to do to make sure that we have evidence-based interventions in the education system as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. That's a very, very interesting question. Of course, research is important, but also the lenses that we use to conduct the research is also important. In other words, what particular lens are we using when we put together this data? How do we analyze this data? Whose perspective are we looking at? And what is the end? What is the objective of this? If it is to reduce what we call violent extremism, and there are several questions here from Zafar Gundal, who's talking about the causes of violent extremism in Africa, I think. And he's talking about the fact that there is injustice, there is corruption, not so much religious divides. So the point is that contexts are very important. We have to look, there is no one size fits all approach to defining this very complex thing that we call violent extremism. I also want to give you, if you have a minute, let us look at the history of the term radicalization, radical. When I was young, which I hope was not that long ago, to be a radical was considered to be a badge of honor, because it meant that you came from a political persuasion where you were questioning the sort of regressive norms of society. Gradually, and especially after 9/11, the word radical has assumed a very negative connotation. So radicalization today is associated with violent extremism or something that contributes. So there are many programs to de-radicalize the youth. Now, if the youth will not have radically different ideas, how will change come about? Now, what we really need to talk about are disruptions and not radically new ideas. But, we need to understand the etymology of certain terms that have passed into the collective consciousness, the global consciousness. Where are these ideas originating? How are these terms being framed? How are they defining research? And so on. I know I've overtaken my time, but a dispassionate understanding, not just empirically based, but of course, empirically gathered data, but sensitive to context. Each context is different. Now, why is it that the educated young people engaged in the bakery incident in Bangladesh? What drove them? It's obviously not economic marginalization. It was something else that they were looking at. So we need to understand the socio-cultural context, the position, the particular moment in history, the colonial legacies. And I think what we need to really do now is to create a culture of abundance, shifting away from limits to possibilities. Because it's so much more edifying to think of how many apples there will be in a seed than to just count the number of seeds in an apple. So, that's what I would like to submit. I don't know if I'm completely off the mark. But
thank you so much, Dr. Gopinath. I think we don't have too much time, just we have to switch with the second dialogue. I thank all the youth speakers for being in this dialogue. Thank you so much for your great information, your great inputs. We really appreciate that one. And also thank you so much to our senior experts. We really enjoyed discussing with you. Thank you so much. So, and we apologize for maybe internet connection, poor connection, because of maybe from our youth speakers or us. And I hand over to Maya. Maya, you can say your last speech, and then we switch to the second dialogue.
I think just thank you from my side as well to Dr. Gopinath, Mr. Muralitharan, and all of our excellent youth speakers. Thank you so much. Everybody, it's been a really great first dialogue, and we will now pass over to the second dialogue. Over to you, Bram. Thank you.
Thank you.
For this
Thank you all. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Parvez. Thank you to all the speakers, to all the panelists, youth and senior. Wow, this was a very, very inspirational first intergenerational dialogue. But without further ado, it's time for our second dialogue. The moderators of the second dialogue will be Ms. Shreya Yani. She's a consultant PVE and iTAGe for UNESCO MGIEP. And Ms. Seshadri Kotyarachi, I hope I pronounced that well, she's a strategic communication advisor. So Shreya and Seshadri, the floor is yours for the second dialogue. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Bram, for handing over the floor to us. And after this very inspiring and thought-provoking first session, we hope to have an equally inspiring and thought-provoking second session for this event. We have been faced with very interesting questions and nuances that have been shared to the first dialogue about radicalization and the importance of using the right vocabulary or revisiting vocabularies, asking ourselves the question, why we've accepted certain vocabularies. From the youth speakers, we have gotten inspirational stories of how state and non-state actors have a role to play in perpetuating violent extremism, and how young people, through their imagination and perseverance and their gumption to do something for society, have worked towards transformation, are working towards transformation. And now we are now entering into the next session where we will explore personal stories a little bit more. We will also look at how our personal stories and the context impact this discourse, specifically when it comes down to defining and revisiting these terminologies in the South Asian context, because for too long we have taken the descriptions and definitions coming from global north as well. And so I think the PVE report that the young people are currently writing is an attempt to kind of bring a South Asian discourse to the forefront. I'm very, very happy to be joined by my moderator, youth moderator, Seshadri, who will be carrying most of the load of this interaction, because we have to move away from just tokenism of youth, and we need to actually give the platform to them. And so I'm so happy to have Seshadri with me, and over to you, Seshadri, to take over the proceedings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shreya. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm very pleased to be moderating this particular session, the second segment of the panel discussions that we've had so far. And as Shreya rightfully said, we're hoping to explore more lived experiences and perspectives of the panelists. We have an impeccable lineup of senior officials and youth activists and young people who are working in circles of peacekeeping and prevention of violent extremism. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. However, a few housekeeping rules before we begin. This session is going to be segmented into two parts. The first, where I will be asking more direct questions to our panelists, after which we will open up the floor for a conversation and dialogue, during which we will pick up on some of the questions that have been shared with us on the chat. So please feel free to send your questions in the Q&A box. If you want to direct it towards a particular speaker, please mention their name in the outset of your question, and we will direct it to them as time permits. The second point I'd like to make is for our panelists, kindly mute your mics when you are not presenting or responding. And when you are about to present, or if you feel like a particular question is one you would like to contribute towards, then by all means, unmute yourself and express what's on your mind. You are more than welcome. So having said that, I would like to direct the first question towards Mahatma. Hello, hope you're keeping well, and thank you so much for joining us today. My question to you has a lot to do with lived experiences, Mahatma, and to do with what it was like growing up in Manipur, growing up within a culture where, for example, the AFSPA, the Military Powers Act, is quite powerful. You have up to 40 known insurgent groups currently within the region, and you've really grown up within this sort of concept. So I'd like to know two things. What was your experience like, and how has this shaped your perspective and the work that you're currently involved in? Over to you, Mahatma.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good morning to whoever is out there. Thank you, Shishadri, for asking me that question. I will be narrating a lot of life experiences with myself in relation to the question that is being asked. Just before we go beyond to Armed Force Special Power Act, I want to revisit a little bit back to 1918 when our grandfathers, great-grandfathers were taken to France as a French labor corps during the World War, after which the idea of whole self-determination came into the picture, and after which the independence of Indian Union happened, and where the Armed Force Special Power Act has been implemented in the state since 1958, right? So it has been many decades of armed conflict going on between the state and the non-state actors, after which what we have seen is that due to the long prolonged insurgency movement, armed conflict movement in the state, in the region, we have seen we are just coming up from a HIV pandemic that was happening because many were taking solids out of the drugs that was happening, unable to cope up with the conflict that was also happening in our region. We had one of the highest HIV infection rates in the whole country, right? So it has been a challenging childhood for us, as well as for many people who has grown up, and we have lost many generations out of which, right? And this, the state and the non-state players, which has in conflict, has spoiled many childhoods. And then coming back to my example, it was only when I was 22 years old that I realized that I was having post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Just being mindful of that I had PTSD. And this is what our generation, our elder generation, as well as our younger generations are facing, right? So there's a huge gap as well between the state and the non-state players fighting over each other, where the common people, the children, especially children and youths, are being the survivors of this conflict. So yes, the perspective towards how we are working and why we are working now is also because that no child and no youth deserves to grow up in such a situation, right? And then we deserve a better place. So it's very hard for me to imagine what a peaceful city looks like, what a peaceful life looks like, because since for decades we have seen armed people, both state and non-state players around us. We have survived losing people both in state and non-state actors, right, from our families. So the only one left behind are us, which is one of the hardest thing to go on and move on. So I think our youth, our children deserve better, and that is how and why we're working.
Thank you so much, Matani, for that very stirring and frank expression of reality, of what it's like to live in that context and yet be inspired to do more and to do better for young people. For those of us who have joined in, Mr. Mahatma is the director at Recognize, Rise and Empower Association, and is also the founder of Teach for Northeast in India. And this is just part of what he does on behalf of young people, as he himself mentioned. My next question also goes towards another founding president of the Afghanistan Justice Organization, Ms. Laila Nasiri. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being a part of this conversation. You are someone who has been engaged in these circles for many years, extensively, and connecting with the question I asked Matani, what I would like to ask you is, how have things changed since your youth? How have situations from your perspective changed? And do you think young people now have a better chance at fueling change within their societies? Thank you.
Thank you, Sheshadri. Greetings to everyone who has joined the meeting today. I'm glad to be part of it. I think in response to your question, I must say, for me and the generations later, especially the young people now, almost nothing has changed. That's because I grew up when my country was going through conflict. And the young people are similarly growing up in a conflict situation, even worse than before. So nothing more no big change, I would say. Definitely young people, all people of my country, everyone who lives in Afghanistan or anywhere in the world, deserve to live a peaceful life with all human rights that they deserve. But unfortunately, in Afghanistan, that's going through a long-term conflict, looking at any opportunity that can bring Afghan people a peaceful life is most wanted. But we have still not experienced it. Just like Matami said, every young person, children, youth, they need to live and they deserve to live in a peaceful life and peaceful situation. The same thing I think is for youth in Afghanistan. Of course, there are, when countries go through conflict, many difficulties the people of those countries face, whether it's the basic human rights of them, whether it's education, access to health, and many other aspects that people deserve to have in life. Unfortunately, just like any other country that's going through conflict, in Afghanistan as well, it's mostly the youth that are victims of violent extremism, radicalization, and any other sort of such activities that lead, especially the youth, towards conflict. So when we talk about violent extremism, or which then go to change to conflict in countries, I think the education system in Afghanistan, the social system in Afghanistan, and also the political situation, all these together has made it even worse for youth, even the educated youth, those who are going to schools and universities, the madrasas. They are the target, especially in madrasas, which I'm sure you have read about in news and researches. Afghanistan, unfortunately, does not have even a strategy for countering violent extremism. I definitely believe that it's the government in every country that must pay attention to the situation in their country and then tackle the problems that lead toward extremism, and especially the violent extremism, and engagement of youth in such activities. And that's not only the responsibility then of the government, but also the people, the civil society, to work on programs that can counter violent extremism. My organization that I lead since 2011, we have worked in different areas when it comes to extremism, working with youth in big cities and even district levels in Kabul and many provinces, to make them or to talk to them on the issues that basically made them to become extremists or then shift to violent extremism. We worked even with insurgents, those who were supporting Taliban, those who were actually in conflict. And most of them youth, when looking at the reasons why they become violent extremists, it was not the ideology usually. It's usually the social differences, the unequal distribution of resources. Those were basically the reasons for them to become extremists. In general, I would say definitely governments must look at strategies and policies that secure youth's future and prevent them toward going towards extremist actions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Lainuma. There was quite a lot to unpack there. And I think something that was also touched upon in the previous discussion was really, as you mentioned, the role of education and also reaching out to vulnerable young people and ensuring that they don't fall into the sort of communal thinking towards radicalization and so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, that was also the question that I wanted to direct towards Ms. Sharanya Rao, who is a program manager at Atut Nepal and an NET qualified teacher. As an educator yourself, something I wanted to broach with you was, how do you think that we can prevent the radicalization of children, and not just any children, but children in remote areas of their respective countries, vulnerable children? How do you as an educator see the role of education preventing young minds from condoning violence? And what has your experience been in these circles? Sharanya, if you could please elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Shishadri. Good evening, good morning, good day to all who are present here. That is a very pertinent question, in fact, Shishadri. And through our work at the grassroots level, I work in rural Nepal. We are based, we work in villages of Kapilvastu district, which is the south of Nepal. So through our work, we combat gender-based violence on a daily basis, unfortunately. And the role of education, I would say it's not only formal education, but also a lot of informal education that is necessary with communities, with the girls, with boys, with parents, and with the communities as a whole to combat a lot of the violence that we see against women, against girls, and against other communities in general. So the organization I work at, Atut, which means unbreakable in the Nepali language, similarly in Hindi as well, Atut, something which cannot be broken. And that is what we see our girls to be. We see them to be as unbreakable, and that is what we hope that they become in their futures through, as they grow up, through the extreme hardships they face in their lives. They literally are unbreakable. So the role of education, very much, as I think even Sadia was mentioning in the previous dialogue, is that in formal education, through building peace curriculum, through building several modules within formal education itself, as well as informal. So we also use sports as a tool. So there are several tools which can be used to informally educate communities and children as well. So we have found through our experience that sports is a very effective tool in combating violent extremism of various forms. So we specifically use football to combat a lot of the challenges we face with our children over there. And yes, I think that is all I have to say.
Fantastic. That's very interesting. I feel like a lot of research that looks into bringing children together and youth together, cohesion-based activities. So far, sports has been a winning entity. Can't relate to much of a sporty person myself, but it's good to hear that these are the vectors in which,
if I can just add on, sorry, this also.
So
if I can,
brilliant. Thank you for sharing. Of course.
If I can just add on, I was also saying it is also important in the role of education to build the soft skills and the software that Dr. Gopinath was talking about in the previous dialogue as well. So education definitely plays a very important role in not just, through the hardware as she was speaking about, but also building the soft skills and building up resilience, your confidence, your empathy, apathy, all of that, not apathy, empathy, I'm sorry, towards towards all communities. So yes, sports definitely is a very important tool that we use in our work.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, Sharanya. I'd now like to divert the conversation towards an aspect that we haven't quite touched on yet so far during the sessions, and that is to do with violence directed during elections, election-related violence. And to talk about this, I believe we have the best suited candidate, Dr. Sakwat Hussain, who is an author, speaker, and security analyst, but is also more poignantly a former elections commissioner and a brigadier general. He has written extensively on his work and his experiences while holding on to these prestigious titles, and we're very, very pleased to have you with us, Dr. Hussain, and we're looking forward to engaging with you during this session. My question to you, Doctor, is what causes election-related violence? Through your experience within the South Asian region, what have you noted as the root causes of election-related violence, and how would you propose that this sort of violence can be diffused or preempted before it turns into actionable violence? Thank you, sir. Dr. Hussain, you will have to unmute yourself. Dr. Hussain, I'm afraid. Oh,
well,
right.
Thank you very much, Sheshadri. Thank you, Seher, for inviting me. And I would find it a very educative platform for me, listening to young people from the various countries and particularly the various corners, and sharing their experiences on the violent extremism. I'm sure the definitions have already been dealt with when we talk of violent extremism. There could be extremism on ideological base. There are extremism on the political base, social base, and you name, there will be a lot of other things that we are now seeing, particularly in our region. And some of them are imported from outside, some of them are generated within. But then there are all causes. One single cause may not be applicable for all the countries. But then the theme remains the same, that resorting to extremism and in a conflict situation on all issues to be settled, whether it is ideological, whether it is political, whether it is social or economical. Having said that, the question that you have asked me in particular, I would share my thoughts and my study on it. See, in South Asia particularly, when we talk of political violence, you have to take note that what is the political culture that we could establish in our countries. So each country is a different political culture. For example, I may just say that, for example, let's say Afghanistan, as an example. I hope she will excuse me with saying that. There's a conflict situation in Afghanistan. And of course, there's a conflict. We know the background why Afghanistan is in conflict. For years, I think many of you have not been born when the Afghanistan entered in this conflict in 1990s, which was induced into Afghanistan. And now the elections in Afghanistan, for example, under these circumstances, no one expected to be non-violent because there was a situation as such. We have seen same thing in Sri Lanka, for example, years back. Same thing we are seeing in Manipur, for example, years back. So this is one sort of violence that we see post-election or pre-election or during election. But most of the violence that we see categorized in places like Bangladesh, or for example, for India, though there is no participant from Pakistan, I believe, apparently there is no conflict as Afghanistan is going through or Northeast India is going through. Yet we see violence. We saw violence in India in the last election in West Bengal, and for that matter, I don't know what's going to happen in Bihar, which is coming up, and Uttar Pradesh, which is coming up. But then, for example, in Bangladesh, we have seen extreme violence almost in all elections, particularly the election of 1980s and then thereafter. If I take as a case study of Bangladesh. There are a couple of reasons why these violence are there. If you also study, and you'll see that there were few elections in Bangladesh which were absolutely non-violent, because those were held under a different system known as caretaker system, and they were no party people. So all machineries were geared into that particular government, to support that particular government and their directives. So his election commission could also function in the same manner. They could control and have a controlled election. But why we saw in Bangladesh this thing of late, I would count them from 1991 onward. The reason is that we have not been in Bangladesh, we have not been able to establish a political culture. When I'm talking about the political culture, I'm talking about political maturity and the political dispensation, and of course the hierarchical or patriarchal system of nominating people, or almost client-like situation. So that is gone into the politics, and that is continuing in Bangladesh. And therefore, what we find major problem in law and order situation during even prior to election. We find people being killed, people being attacked, and then the sad part of it, that the minorities are identified who they are voting, where the voting bloc is going, and so the attack on them or scaring them not to vote. So this we see. So I can flag a few of the points, particularly when talking about Bangladesh, I find is a low political culture. Second is the politicization of the administration who are supposed to conduct that election, politicization of the institution, lack of governance, and of course, the absence of liberal democracy. I can go on for hours together, but let me limit in this. And what I see, same thing being more or less seen in India, which has come up particularly in last, let's say, 10 years' time. India was supposed to be a kind of a role model for South and Southeast Asia, particularly Afro-Asian countries, in conducting of election. But we saw in last 20 years or 25 years, the violence adding to it. And then slowly and gradually now we find, quote unquote, the arrival of Hindutva and the saffron, which is coming into the very much in election. What we see now, Uttar Pradesh, which is probably going to have election next year, early next year. And we have seen previously in Bihar, where there was a factionalism and the election violence was there. But then it is saddened to see that India is slowly and gradually slipping into that kind of electoral anarchy in some places. I won't say India is a very big country. I'm not saying it is in every state, but particularly what we saw in Bengal. Pakistan, for example.
Dr. Hussain,
Yep.
if I may interject, I'm just revisiting my introduction of you where I said that you were the best person to cover this area of discourse, and I'm sure everyone listening in right now agrees with me. There's such a vast area of knowledge that you have to contribute, and we will revisit that in the second segment of the panel discussion, Dr. Hussain, for the benefit of time. So thank you so much for your insight. I would now like to briefly direct the conversation towards our next youth panelist, who's also from my neck of the woods, Sri Lanka, Mr. Janith Prabhashwara Pereira, who is a youth peace activist, an advocate, an educator, and a researcher. Based on these merits, Janit, my question to you, and it also in many ways connects with what Dr. Hussain was talking about, creating a culture where we are more self-aware of our rights and our capacity within voting, within the parameters of an election, for example. My question to you would be, how do you think that academics and research can support the prevention of violent extremism? And my question is directed towards, how can the work that people do at a grassroots level be supported by this research? You yourself have been part of many EU-led research programs, and you've been in the thick of it, so to speak. How do you think this can be used strategically, and how do you think that this can be developed into advocacy, specifically among young people? If you could very briefly sort of give us your insight into this, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you again, Dr. Hussain, for that.
Thank you for that imperative question, Vishedastri. So what I think is, now when it comes to young people, trying to make sure that we prevent violent extremism, what young people think should have solid evidence. Because when we have certain opinions formulated, when we try to mobilize people for a certain cause, we need evidence. We need to showcase solid proof that there is a problem like this. Because I think when it comes to the Sri Lankan context and many other contexts, the general public do not agree that there is some sense of violent extremism. Sometimes it has become normalized. We do not, specifically try to address, and especially in certain South Asian countries, this is something that I have also experienced when I reach to the grassroots. They have a lot of problems, but they do not view those problems as able to be solved. So I think we need to have research, and the practitioners and the researchers should collaborate, and they have to go in hand. Then only we can think about persistent and durable solutions to the problems of violent extremism in Sri Lanka and many other countries in the South Asian region. So when I went through my research, basically I had to interview several young peace builders. I had to interview several victims of violent extremism. What I understood is, our researchers have not focused about the contribution of young people as perpetrators as well as the peace builders when it relates to violent extremism. So we need to focus more on what young people are doing to prevent violent extremism, to counter violent extremism, and also look why there are some people who are attracted to become violent extremists. Especially, there's a lot of political, religious, and ethnic factors which are underneath young people going into violent extremism. At the same time, we have certain political, social, cultural factors affecting those who are going towards becoming a young peace builder who has a certain genuine intention of becoming a person to counter and prevent violent extremism. So I think the universities, the think tanks, the research institutes, they have to look at the young people. I think the United Nations Security Council agenda, the 2250 Youth, Peace and Security agenda, have we localized that adequately in Sri Lanka, in India, in all the South Asian countries? I think we have not been able to yet contextualize and localize it adequately. There have been certain efforts. I am really happy that there have been certain efforts, but I'm not satisfied. So I think young people should be given the opportunity to come forward, and they should be given the leadership as well as the mentorship, because we have some good senior officials, experts, and I think that mentorship is lacking. So I believe that if we can focus on participatory research, where young researchers in collaboration with young advocates and activists, they go to the field and they do activities on one aspect, it's research. On one aspect, we are providing the psychosocial support, the training, the advocacy, and mobilizing the people. So I think we can do both. And then only, I think we will understand what goes hand in hand. And then we can develop better advocacy plans, better research plans, because we have both together and there's a collaboration. I think that collaboration is integral if you want to go a journey where we can prevent violent extremism in Sri Lanka as well as the South Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Thank you for that very cohesive explanation and for bringing out some very pertinent points, especially the role of youth within violence within the South Asian region. So with that, we conclude the first round of questions. We will now open the floor for a dialogue between the senior officials and the youth panelists. But before we proceed there, Shreya, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been listening to all the speakers so far, and part of the intergenerational dialogue for me is also learning from our history. Otherwise, we repeat the mistakes of our past. And also part of it is to also kind of acknowledge what we have been given by the past and the burden of the past that we are carrying. And I think one of the biggest burdens of South Asia that we carry is the colonization history that South Asia has, and the imperialistic mindset and the feudal mindset that South Asian communities have had in the past. And I also believe that one of the key things that we are also grappling constantly with is that the international vocabulary of peace and peace building and the way that we address and imagine peace is also something which has come from our European counterparts or American counterparts. And though we have a rich legacy of our own people's movements here, they don't somehow influence the imagination of formal administration. And we've all witnessed protracted conflict in various ways and have had to live with people who've died during conflict. So to all the speakers, and starting with the youth speakers, first of all, given this large burden that we carry on our shoulders, what are the few things that we need to be mindful of as we go ahead and reimagine this landscape? And how do we make it a landscape which frees us from this colonization and imperialistic mindset, and also our own baggage of feudalism and patriarchy that we carry? So for you, where do you see a context or a traditional wisdom which has helped you kind of move forward in this? And how do we actually make our administration, as Dr. Hussain said, less politicized and actually work towards cohesive governance in this region? So I'll start off by asking any of the youth speakers to kind of give their inputs on the question, and then obviously we'll move on to the senior speakers as well to ponder on what they feel is the response to this question. Thank you so much. So Sharanya, would you like to answer that from your perspective, perhaps?
Sure. So like you said, South Asia has a deep-rooted history of colonization and a feudal mindset. And this is very visible in the communities we work with as well. There is a lot of, caste discrimination and a deep-rooted patriarchal mindset in the communities, which I think is also a very feudal, like leads from a feudal mindset. So like I was talking to Sheshadri again, education is, I think, key in helping come out of all of this. And education, not just in terms of through school education, but also spreading awareness among the masses. And this is something I have noticed we struggle with in our work as well. Connecting policies to the grassroots level. While, there are a lot of policies and laws in place and everything is well-intentioned, but the actual implementation of it at the ground level it's a very different story. So a lot of work needs to be done on translating a lot of the laws and a lot of the policies which are also created at the time of, independence, or because of the British or because of something like that. So a lot of the laws as well are feudal sometimes, and getting them to the masses is something we struggle with. And I think through really deep intensive engagement with communities is something that will help get us out of this rut that we are stuck in.
Thank you so much, Sharanya. And Mahatma, I mean, I think one of the discourses that when I was working in Manipur, I saw a lot was that India takes Manipur to be its fiefdom, right? And it's very colonial in the way that it deals with Manipur. So what are your views in terms of states which are violent and state extremism as well, where there are, insurgent groups, but states are also violent? How, in your practices, do you hold state accountable for the violence that it perhaps perpetuates?
Yes, Shreya. I think one of the biggest challenges that we also have is that our states are not accountable for their actions, right, under colonial laws. And that is one of the biggest problems that we also have, because as we have seen in the country in the last 3-4 years, is that with the using of the seditious law that is colonial in nature, there is no space for dialogue, there is no space for dissent. If I have an issue, if I raise the issue, I might be locked up, right? So there is no space for that. So without that, without understanding the different aspirations one has as a youth, as a child, I think it becomes impossible to bring that dialogue, right? But how do we move forward to have small but sustainable changes, right? Let's leave aside the big changes that we are seeing, but how do we bring that small but sustainable changes that can lead to the bigger things? So reconciliation becomes very critical. Reconciliation, for that to happen, there has to be dialogue between all the state, non-state actors and all the stakeholders, right? And after that, how do we rehabilitate? Because I think we have been oppressed, we have been survivors of this for decades, right? There has to be a rehabilitation policy, because if not, then how do we start from the scratch, and we are moving backward, right? So how do we start? How do we rehabilitate our own people? And we are considered Manipur as an integral part of the country, but in nature, in laws, we are not considering them, right? So how do we reconcile? How do we rehabilitate? And then how do we bring that small sustainable changes is what is very important for us. And again, laws has to be accountable even for the policymakers. And then one very important thing is that the youths, the children has to be educated. The youths has to play an integral role in being a change agent in terms of being part of the political structure, right? And being part of the political ecosystem, so that they play a role and they decide what is best for the community as well as best for the citizens. If not, then if youth doesn't play an integral role, and if we feel and believe that we will let the senior citizens, no offense to them, but them to make the policy, make the rules, then I think that is a big issue, and youth has to play an integral role.
Thank you so much, Mahatma, from bringing the legal aspect, and Sharanya for the education aspect. And to Janet, I'll have to ask, one of the biggest things as a person who have done research is that how do you decolonize research? Because research impacts policy. And if research still uses colonial lenses and uses lenses which are taught in power politics, then how, in your opinion, can research be freed of all these tropings?
Thank you so much. I think now when we look at the young people's involvement in peace and security, I think, as you previously mentioned, it's more towards a European bias. We have all these concepts coming from the Europe, but I think we have forgotten certain integral elements. One is, as I previously mentioned, we need to always contextualize, and then we need to localize. But I think in Sri Lanka and many parts of the world, we have not been successfully contextualizing and localizing. Even in research, I think the role of the academia is to bring forth these things and to deconstruct them and make it to the local level, to bring it to the local level. And that is very important. Now, you don't need to go far to Europe. If you look at Sri Lanka, if you look at India, if you even look at South Africa, we have lots of inspirational leaders who have tried to make changes. If I speak about Mahatma Gandhi, he was a person who went against violent extremism, especially making a discourse on the untouchables, the widows, and all these victims. So he was able to mobilize young people. There were lots of young people following the footsteps of Mahatma Gandhi. So what he did was he tried to make a change in the way you think, especially violent ideologies. That is, bringing forth people into doing violent extremist activities. If you look at Nelson Mandela from South Africa, he also did the same thing. He was able to mobilize thousands of young people. And that showcases the power of young people. And even if you look at the experience of Buddha, Buddha was from India and I am a Buddhist from Sri Lanka, India, we have Buddhist roots. And in the Buddhist suttas, the Kalama Sutta and the Sigalovada Sutta, especially, there are certain suttas and sermons and discourses on violent extremism and how that can be prevented. So we have all these things, but do we have adequate research focused on these things? I don't think so, because these things which are easier to be, socialized, if we bring out these concepts from the Buddhist discourse to the Sri Lankan concept, to the Sri Lankan social aspect, I think that would be far more interesting the people, because of a country where Buddhism is the main religion. In India also, I think there are these, possible interventions where you take out certain religious and other inspirational leaders and try to build out certain principles and concepts that can call young people to come into preventing violent extremism and also trying to rehabilitate. Especially, we have heard a lot of stories about leaders rehabilitating young people or changing the mindsets of young people, especially changing the dynamics from perpetrator to a peace builder. Even a perpetrator can be rehabilitated into a youth peace builder. I think these are things that we need to focus on. So as a researcher, what I would say is we have to look at what is available in the European think tank, and we have to localize it. We have to contextualize. We have to amalgamate them with Sri Lankan experiences, South Asian experiences. Look at dynamic leaders. It might be even present celebrities. We have to look into their experiences.
Janet, it's interesting what you're saying. I want to, like, this whole bit of taking what the West has and kind of giving it an Indian or a Sri Lankan context, to me is very, very problematic. And I'd like to shift to Leila Manasri for that, because I think you have, as Afghanistan, faced the brunt of this particular mindset where Western ideas were taken and tried to put in Afghan context. And how do you think that that has panned out for Afghanistan? Do you think it's a healthy thing to do, and or what's the alternative? For me, I find it a bit, I will disagree with you, Janet, on this. So I want to know what Leila has to say about this.
Thank you, Shreya. I think the Afghanistan context is a little different. Even I personally think that contextualization is important, and the ideas that come in must be contextualized, because the context in my country is different, the situation is different. So, but looking at my experience in the field, I found out that even the ideas that were imported did not work, and also contextualization. So research is one area that has been weak in my country's context, especially the research done by Afghans. that's why the way forward, or way that can take us from this situation out, has yet not been identified. So looking at both sides, whether it's contextualization or whether it's importing ideas, I think a lot of study needs to be done on it. For me, I personally think it has not worked in Afghanistan. Looking at what Jayant was talking about, role models, I even think of, okay, we talk about Abdul Ghaffar Khan, someone who worked together with Gandhiji, and also Gandhiji as role models who work nonviolence, on nonviolence in their societies, in their countries. I think we need to find out role models among youth, because I think we cannot be successful if we are looking back in the head and see role models like Mahatma Gandhi or Abdul Ghaffar Khan or many others, because it also has not worked in our society. Youth are getting more into violence and violent extremism. It means those role models are not effective. So working on finding out role models among youth is important. I think that. Policy research, its findings and policy connection, these are very important. And I think in all areas that or countries that we find, whether they are facing the conflict, whether extremism is high, whether society is going towards violent extremism, I think changes at policy level are very important. And as Sharania said, formal and informal education systems must be re-looked at. Our education system must prepare us for peaceful societies. In my country, the education system does not prepare us for a peaceful society. So, and then we are going through conflict continuously since last 40 years. So I think that's what I think.
Sorry, yeah, if you don't mind me interjecting, because I also want to address some of the questions that we've received, and what you've been talking about so far has been captured by one of the questions we've received by Oshan. And what he asks us is, what kind of policy reforms and recommendations can young people advocate for in order to promote for a very specific future and sort of address the challenges that you've also mentioned, and Janet and Matani and Dr. Hussain also touched upon. So just want to acknowledge Oshan's question, because it's in relation to what we've been discussing also. We are a little pressed for time, which is a shame, because the opinions and the conversations that are currently building up are just so diverse and so imperative to the grander scheme of things and the publication, for example, that we're hoping to produce. However, thank you so much for being concise in your responses and for sharing your thoughts with us. Before we come to a conclusion, however, because the purpose of this panel is to also sort of support the publication that will eventually come of it, I would like to direct an open question to all the panelists. And the question to you would be, what would be a recommendation from your perspective, from your line of work, that you would like to go towards the PVE report that is being produced? If you could very briefly, in no more than 1 minute, just let us know your thoughts, a recommendation from your perspective, I would greatly appreciate that. The floor is now open to the senior officials and the youth panelists to respond. Thank you. Dr. Hussain, you have been muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Excuse me, I have not been able to hear your question clearly. Can Shreya please?
Yes.
Yeah, I think your voice is a little bit of muted, I don't say. So Could you please repeat quickly?
Sure, sure. My question is, what recommendation would you give for the report that is being produced after this panel discussion and through all the research that has been carried out? What perspective or recommendation towards the prevention of violent extremism can you share as a concluding statement as we begin to wrap up the panel? I hope that was clear.
Yes, I think that is very clear. Let me very quickly, if I may be allowed, very quickly just flag few points on research work. I don't want to go in detail, which have already been discussed. Most of us, except probably Afghanistan and to some extent Nepal, have not gone through a kind of a colonial legacy in that sense that we have for the last 200 years or so. The point what I'm trying to make, all research and the other, that violent extremism, for example, it differs from each country. The reasons differs from each country. Now, I have never got the answer from our researcher that why in Bangladesh, which is a Muslim majority country and being run almost, without any prejudice to the Islam as a major religion, why we have ideological violence. I'm not talking about political violence. We have not been able to get the answer. My recommendation is to the young people who are researchers, I would say that look at your problem in your perspective and your context. Now, when you carry out research, we contextualize normally with the theories which is coming from outside. For example, extreme violence. Now, extreme violence in Bangladesh, extreme violence in Afghanistan or in Sri Lanka is, or the basis would be altogether different. Sri Lanka may be having some other reasons, Afghanistan has one reason, and Bangladesh may be having another reason. Our reason, if I may say, more localized, more political problem, the political space problem. Therefore, the theory itself, which is coming as we learn or we copy it from the European version of the theories of our research, it doesn't fit in. Therefore, we have to really theorize when we are working in each of the countries with our own set of problems, and we have to get out of, Oxfordian or Cambridge, or for that matter, any other country, the theories and the research work to start with. And that's what I think so. And we in Bangladesh have been advocating that let us look our problem from our perspective. Why in Bangladesh, which had all the opportunities of getting rid of all kind of violence, we could not. Where was the problem? That problem, it cannot be theorized or cannot be taken theory from America or from England or from other. We have to find out our own theory as to why we could not succeed when we did not have that kind of a burden that other countries are carrying. That's what I would say. And let us research, let us look our problem at our angle.
Thank you so much. That was incredible and very true, very, very true and very pertinent to all young peace builders who are listening in. Thank you so much. I'm now going to move over to Mahatma, if you can very briefly share your thoughts to this question. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of recommendation ideas are there, but one recommendation that I would want to stress is how do we build capacities of grassroots organization towards understanding as well as to promote the message as well as start a conversation of PVE, right? Because right now, example in Manipur, if we do a survey, 95% of the youths will say that they have not heard about PVE, right? And again, if we look at development sector organization, different grassroots organization, we say that we are working in health, we say we are working in education and so many other things, but it's all interlinked again to PVE and so many other root causes, right? But still we are not having this conversation about PVE, right? So that is one gap that is being there. And I believe that example, because again, if I start the conversation about PVE, because many will feel that I'm also biased because I'm part of this ecosystem, right? And then maybe many will feel that I'm also trying to promote a different narrative. So for UNOOC example, they coming in and then collaborating and building the capacity, as well as taking this outreach messages and starting this conversation will bring more credibility, and then more people will be more open. Especially this, we have realized in our communities that outsider a credible organization coming in. So I think building capacities of grassroots organizations will play a big role in having this narrative conversion about PVE.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matani. I'm now moving over to Ilima. If you could also briefly just give your concluding thoughts, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I think I definitely agree with Mr. Hussain about the difference of the situation in different countries and contexts. I also think that sharing experiences from different countries in the region is very important. Yes, we are facing different situations, but there may be similarities that if one country or one context could prevent violence or violent extremism in their country or societies, that can be useful for another in another place for another reason as well. So sharing information and sharing experiences, that's very important. I definitely emphasize on education. Afghanistan is a totally different context. We are in conflict for different reasons, but youth are definitely victims of violence and violent extremism. So education is important, awareness raising is important, and I must say even international community with their support programs throughout the last 20 years have not paid attention to countering violent extremism. So, so programming on that part is very important as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insights, greatly appreciated. I will now direct the question to Sharanya. If you could also briefly just give us your concluding remarks. Great.
Hi, thank you. So revisiting something I mentioned earlier about how the policy doesn't really reach the grassroots level, I think something the report can speak about is how to build awareness and advocacy campaigns such that the policies actually trickle down to the masses. And I think we have to focus on making societies more enabling for women to flourish. And to quote a famous quote, like, you educate a man and you get a skilled laborer, but you educate a woman and you get a future society. So I think something we really need to focus on is how women have to be enabled and become independent beings who contribute positively to society. Some of the changes we would really like to, concrete changes we want to see in our communities are equal access to education, reduced school dropouts, the acceptance of women as equals, I think is an underlying thing we would like we would like to be worked on in a really targeted way, such that, there is a sustained change, a holistic change in a sustained way, which works for the future generations to come. So yes, that is something I would really like to see mentioned in the report.
Thank you so much, Sharanya, and thank you for bringing up female representation. I really appreciate that. Also, last but certainly not least, Janice, if you could also share your concluding remarks before we wrap.
Yeah, I think with regard to the report, I think they could catch upon the importance of peace education. I think education plays a pivotal role in preventing violent extremism, because the way we think is based on our experiences and background and the education that we receive. So I think we have to go through a process of educational reforms to inculcate the values of peace education into our education system, especially subjects such as citizenship education, history, I think should focus on not only the violent incidents that have been in the past, but giving a message on how we can prevent those. I think that is something that we need to learn from history, especially from history and even from citizenship education. And also, I believe when we look at the future of the educational reforms, I think we need to have multicultural schools We need to have, a mixture of gender in school, because when we have singular gender schools, or when we have a certain school that is only for a certain religious and ethnic identity, I think that promotes the fact that, we have gender stereotypes, we have ethnic and religious stereotypes, and these are what creates violent extremism. Because when we do not have friends from other ethnic groups, from other religions, and from other gender, we do not learn to empathize, we do not learn to understand them. So I think one key thing that can be focused in the research is about the potential of peace education and reforming the education system, so that we can counter the stereotypes and different notions that are challenging the prevention of violent extremism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janet. I can see Bram showing up on my screen, which is my cue to slowly start wrapping up. But before I do, my heartfelt gratitude to all the panelists, Ms. Laila, Dr. Hussain, Mantani, Janice, and Sharanya. Thank you so much for taking the time and for participating in this panel. Your thoughts were greatly appreciated and very well received. And thank you to Shreya for being such a fantastic co-host. Over to you.
Over to Bram now. I think Seshadri is having some technical glitches. So thank you for the stimulating conversation. And I leave it to Bram to conclude the two very engaging dialogues that we've had so far.
Thank you, Shreya, and thank you, Seshadri, for this amazing intergenerational dialogue session 2. We have come to the end of today's event, but please don't go, because we would like to take after my 1 minute closure, we would like to take a picture with each of you. So please don't go and turn on your video. Hearing so many inspiring young voices really makes me hopeful. Policymakers and other key stakeholders in society have to understand that without taking into account the opinions and practices of youth, there will never be any sustainable peace. So I also heard about the power of education in all its forms and its role to prevent violent extremism. Building peace in the mind of human beings is definitely one of the challenges of the 21st century. I would like to thank all the panelists, senior and youth, for your interesting contributions today. We will make sure your voices are reflected in the report. The report will also fill the gap of evidence on PVE in the region, which was mentioned by some of the panelists today. I would also like to thank the audience who joined us, and we hope you have enjoyed the conversation. So let's take a picture with all of us. So if you can please turn on your video. I see all videos are on. So yeah, Julie, you will take the picture, I guess.
Carlos is taking the picture.
Carlos, my colleague Carlos will take a picture. Can you count, Carlos? You ready?
Yeah, we're done. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Thank you, everybody, for today's dialogue. It was such an amazing experience. Let's stay in touch, and we'll keep you posted about the report that will be published. Again, I'll repeat by the end of this year. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, everyone.
Having me in this very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Much.
Hopefully we see each other again and again.
Thank you, Dr. Hussain. I'm sure we will. Thank you. Bye-bye.